Hey guys, I know it's been a while. It's been a really crazy year for me, but I'm back. And I'm going to be pumping out as much content as I possibly can. But I need your help. Ever since I started posting shorts, the algorithm started reducing my reach on my long-form content. So I'm going to make a second shorts channel called Dr. Han's Shorts. I'll link it in the description so you can follow. But any engagement, comments, likes, shares, it's all going to be able to help to get my reach back from what the algorithm did to me. Thanks again. Let's get into the stories. So when I was 7 to 8-ish, my parents took me to a Christmas market that had tons of activities for kids. I didn't know this at the time, but my parents were fighting, and thus preoccupied and just mostly left me on my own. The way it worked was you bought some vouchers at the door and could then go inside and use one voucher for one activity. There was stuff like baking cookies, painting stuff, wood burning for older kids, etc. It was pretty fantastic. Some of the stuff had queues if there was a lot of interest. Now I'd gotten about 10 vouchers. An activity is about 15 minutes, and my parents were in a cafe. Now I'd gotten about 10 vouchers, and for perspective, an activity was about 15 minutes. My parents were in a cafe in the building, but well out of sight. Since it was an area you could only get into if you accompanied a kid or were a kid, I guess they felt safe leaving me alone. This was allowed, but not encouraged. Anyway, I was queuing for my favorite activity there, the fabric painting section, where you got a piece of linen and could drop Christmas patterns and stuff on it. It was already my third time, but whatever, right? I had to queue, and when I was about halfway to the entrance, someone grabbed my arm. I panicked immediately because my parents would never have touched me like that, and I knew nobody else there. I yelped and tried to pull away, but couldn't. Turning, I saw it was an older lady, maybe 40s to 50s, not sure. She was well dressed, looked pretty strict but normal. Anyway, she was pulling me out of the queue against my will. I tried to yell and asked her to let me go, but she just said something like, "You always do this, come on, Marie." My name is not Marie, not even close. I yelled as much, still thinking that she just confused me for someone else. I was a pretty average-looking girl with a brunette ponytail. Nothing particularly special, nor were my clothes. She looked down at me again, scoffed, and told me to stop throwing a tantrum, and that we were going home. It was at that exact moment that I realized if I didn't escape, she would have taken me away, so I basically opened my mouth and screamed at the top of my lungs. Not words, just a screech. Before that, I had mostly asked to be released, etc., loud but not full-on screaming. I was a polite kid, lol. She paused mid-step because clearly I'd startled her, but didn't let go yet. So I just screamed about the only thing I could really make sense of. My name is Sam. This was the first time that people actually looked at us more than a mom/grandma and a kid in a tantrum. Because I'm clearly too old to not know my name and also visibly scared. I was still trying to pull away, but she had a grip on my forearm like a vice. I made eye contact with the first random person I saw looking over. A guy in his early 30s, I guess, definitely younger than her. I just pled for him to help me, and he actually came over at that point. We were inside of the exit. She had dragged me quite far, and I guess at that point she decided it was too much of a hassle and let me go. Since I'd been fighting her, I immediately slammed into the ground, which actually prompted more people to step up to me to help. I was sobbing, and as soon as I could get to my feet, ran the other way to my parents. I must have barreled into 10 plus people and kids on the way to where my parents were. It was a cafe, like I said, and they were in the middle. My mom had super recognizable fake red hair, so Even sobbing, I could see her easily. I banged into a table, knocked stuff off, and just threw myself at my mother. I was in no state to explain, and she was both mad at me for making a scene and really fucking worried because I was not the type to cause a disturbance, pretty much ever. I wanted to explain, but I couldn't. There was a bit of commotion around with people being noisy. But as I calmed down, I realized that the guy I had begged for help was explaining to my parents what had happened. I hadn't even noticed him come with, but I kind of tuned in when he kept asking if my grandma was here or something. My grandma doesn't even live in the same country. It's just me and my parents. He was asking if they could have known the lady. Obviously, my mother confirmed that that was not the case and asked if what he told her was right. He'd confirmed that some woman was dragging me off and calling me Marie. My parents, the guy, his son, who was a fair few years older than me, maybe 15 or so, went with me to security when I tried and failed to describe the lady. The guy had a much better description of her, but she was obviously long gone. I think they called the police, but I never spoke to any cops that I can remember. I felt really awkward and sorry that I ruined the other kid's day there, so I gave him the rest of my vouchers so he could do more stuff if he wanted. He was really nice and gave me a pack of the cookies he baked to eat while the adults were talking. I don't remember any of their names or anything, but I remember how grateful I was to the kid. More so than his dad even. It just really comforted me that I had another kid around who was nice. Anyway, my parents took me home ASAP, of course, and we never went to that place again. There was a short story in the newspaper the next day about a kidnapping scare my mother told me some years later, but it was all just speculation and they didn't even confirm in the paper if it was an attempt or just a misunderstanding. Well, it sure as shit wasn't a misunderstanding. They never caught the lady or did any follow-ups, etc., as far as I'm aware. I actually had bruises on my arm where she gripped me through my sweater. I still don't like Christmas markets much. I'm a stay-at-home mom, so most of my errands get done in the middle of the day when stores are less busy. The other day, I'm in Target with my 3-year-old son, and we eventually end up in the toy section. I've slowly followed him up and down the aisles, occasionally reminding him Christmas is coming every time he says he likes or wants something. I've got an eye on him, but I'm also checking out the weekly ad and texting my husband. I notice a guy who keeps leaving the aisles as we begin to walk down them, but repetitively walks past the end of the aisle. Older guy with a beer gut, early 60s easy. I'm 30 and I gauge by how old my parents and in-laws look. Unfortunate choice in facial hair as he has a porn stash he cannot pull off well. My guard is up now because he wanders by too many times and keeps glancing at my son. We get done in the toy aisles, look at some Christmas decorations, and eventually head to the registers. I end up letting him pick out a toy car because he was having a good day. Well behaved, no accidents, and listening well. I notice the same guy in line a few people behind me, but he moves to a newly open line a moment later. We take our cart and head to the in-store Starbucks because mommy deserves a treat too. I sit my son down at a table with his car and park our cart behind his chair. I make sure he knows I'm getting up to order and I'm literally 8 steps away from him, and he's talking to me the entire time. I go sit back down while I wait for our drinks, take a glance around and don't see porn stash, so I start to think maybe I was just being a little paranoid and start to come up with the reasons why this guy could have been crossing our path. Our order is called and again I tell my son I'll be right back. In the 15 seconds it takes for me to go up, answer the barista's question about whipped cream on his drink, and turn around, porn stash is standing next to my child talking to him. I all but leapt in front of him, putting myself in between them, and pushed my son closer to the wall. I growl at the guy to move back and he takes one step, and make some excuse about just wanting to talk to my son about his toy. My son, hearing my scary voice as he calls it, is now under the table and I can feel myself baring my teeth at this creeper. A manager rushes up and asks what's wrong. I tell him I've noticed this guy hanging around my son and I, and just now being way too close while I was getting our drinks. The manager demands the guy to leave, which he quickly does, as now the entire cafe is staring at him. So, porn stash, let's hope we don't meet again. So this happened in the 90s in Miami during the Christmas holiday break. I was about 7 or 8. Tiny bit of personal backstory. My great-grandmother's, Nana, second husband ended up sexually abusing his grandkids, who had happened to be my aunts and my father for over a decade. But it was never discovered or spoken about until after he passed away, about the same time I was born, so thankfully I never met him. But as we all know, that kind of abuse can seriously alter your view of the world around you. In this case, it made my family hyper-vigilant about protecting me, and I wasn't allowed to go outside alone, or sleep over at anyone's house ever. Okay, now back to the story. Since I was born, Nana had always lived with us. Before I was school-aged, I stayed home with her during the day, and once I began school, she would watch me whenever we had summer or holiday breaks. I loved her. She was a southern red-haired firecracker who took no shits from anyone, but she had the biggest soft spot for me. So this winter break, I had just gotten new rollerblades and was going up and down the paved walkway practicing. My Nana was on the porch reading and watching me, and then the house phone rang. She debated having me come inside while she went to answer it. Cordless phones weren't a thing yet, but I pleaded to stay as I was finally getting the hang of it. She reluctantly agreed and went inside to answer it, but she left the main door open so that she could still see me through the screen door. It took a few minutes for her to return, but during that time, nothing happened, so I think she was more at ease. She returned to her book, and I now was working on learning a few tricks. After maybe about a half hour or so, she said it was time for lunch and we had to go inside. I begged her to let me play just a bit longer, and promised when she finished preparing lunch I would come inside with no questions asked. She stood there watching me for a bit, but then agreed and again went inside, leaving the screen door open, and told me to sing while I skated so she could hear me. I gladly belted our NSYNC digital Get Down as I practiced. Moments later, maybe 2 or 3, a white van came down the street very slowly. They seemed lost, but I didn't pay much mind because I was a kid unaware of the evils of the world, plus I was on the other side of the chain-linked fence, so I was quote-unquote safe. Even when it rolled up and stopped right in front of the house, I kept skating on. I kept on skating. It wasn't until the passenger door opened and an extremely tall man stepped out and asked me which was the highway. At this point, I was nervous, but I held out to the gate for stability and pointed in the direction. He made some small chat that I can't really recall, but it was along the likes of how was my Christmas and what did Santa bring me, etc. And then he asked if I wanted to have the toys that his daughter didn't want, a Barbie house. I was still silent because now I was scared. The way he looked at me was dark. He was smiling, but his eyes seemed both joyful and vicious. It still unnerves me to this day. He slowly came closer to the gate and asked if I wanted to check out the toy. This is exactly what they taught about the stranger danger stuff in school and home, so I shook my head and began to skate backwards towards the door, not wanting to take my eyes off him, but also not wanting to yell or run because I didn't want to be quote-unquote rude, if he really was just a nice guy. He came closer to the point where he was only a few feet away from the gate, and asked if my parents were home. Now all thoughts of politeness vanished, and I panicked, yelled for my Nana, and tried to run inside, which landed me promptly on my back, and I smacked the back of my head against the concrete. At that exact same moment, he unlatched the gate inside, and before he could get to me, my Nana came bursting through the door with a cast iron skillet in hand, cursing. He looks up, sees her, and bolts. He hopped back into the van, and before the door could close properly, the driver was speeding down the street. My Nana bypassed me completely and ran after the van, screaming at them, and I later learned trying to get their tag, but there wasn't one. She picked me up and carried me inside and called the police and my dad while she asked what happened. 10 minutes later, I'm with the paramedics getting my scraped elbow patched up while my Nana spoke with the police. My dad showed up soon after, and I didn't go outside the rest of that break. Years later, in my late teens, it came up one Christmas in conversation, and I got more of the story. Turns out my Nana was on edge more than normal because there had been a man who had broken into a woman's apartment in Broward, a city over, and assaulted her just before Christmas and was still on the loose. The description my Nana and I both gave the police matched the rapist to the T. Bald spot, bright blue eyes, and well over 6 feet tall. We don't know if they ever caught him, or them, since I'm sure whoever was driving the van was 100% down with whatever evil plan that man had for me. But thank God for my Nana, rest in peace. And creepy guy asking a child for directions. Let's not meet.